Tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Canadians have been spared from a snap federal election, 1 year to the day the Liberals won their second mandate. The Conservatives, despite being backed by the Bloc Québécois, have been defeated on a motion to form a special anti-corruption committee aimed at looking into pandemic spending. Reading between the lines, that includes looking into what connection the Prime Minister and his family had to We Charity, which at one point was going to run the student grant program. The Prime Minister insisted the motion would set the stage for a confidence vote and would force an election nobody wanted. Well, the nays had it, and the Liberal government is staying put. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, is in the House of Commons tonight. David, did the NDP save Canadians from a snap election?
Well, indeed they did, Rob, and for those who did not want an election, and polls say that was a majority of Canadians. Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, was saying before the vote that, he thought it was absurd that the Prime Minister decided to make a motion that simply would have created a parliamentary committee into a confidence matter. It's simply never been done before. But that said, Singh and the NDP say they still believe that there are other ways to hold the government to account over their actions involving the We Charity as well as spending related to the pandemic.
We are voting for Canadians. We are voting against an election. We are going to continue to work for people. And that means continuing to hold the government to account.
Now, the Conservatives also thought that the PM had vastly overreached, declaring their motion to be a matter of confidence. Nonetheless, the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois, as you mentioned, they voted in favour. They were on the losing side. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, though, had this warning for the Prime Minister.
We're here to ask questions in accordance with our role as an opposition party. And we are never going to let the arrogance or entitlement of the Liberal Party to stand in our way of asking reasonable questions that Canadians want us to ask.
Now, what was Trudeau's problem? Well, he tried to argue that had this committee been created by the Conservatives, that would have paralyzed Parliament.
We don't want an election. Canadians don't want an election. But Canadians need to know that their Parliament continues to work constructively.
Now, let's talk about the We controversy. Does that go away now?
No, it does not go away, but the investigation into the We Charity and the Liberal actions gets folded, I think, into the broader considerations of other government pandemic spending. And that would include what the opposition is calling the latest scandal, and that scandal involves the awarding of a contract for ventilators, a contract worth $270 million to a Montreal company that was just recently incorporated, and one of its principals just happens to be someone who, a year ago, was in the Liberal caucus. Robin?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Let's bring in our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes, did the Liberals actually want this election to happen?
That's a great question, Robin. Was it pandemic hardball to avoid scrutiny, or were the Liberals willing to go to an election? Well, certainly the opposition believes the Liberals wanted an election, even though we have heard Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and others deny it. At the end of the day, only the Liberals know what their true intention was here, but I can tell you that sources we've spoken to say that this aggressive and brash statement of actually taking this to a confidence vote meant the threat was real, that the government felt they were not bluffing on this and they were willing to go to the polls if they needed to. One senior Liberal source told me the Liberals felt they could do quite well on an election platform of pandemic spending, childcare and pharmacare if they did have to face Canadians.
The Liberals seemed rather confident about turning this non-confidence vote their way. Haven't they essentially backed the opposition into a corner?
Well, what mattered here was less whether the Liberals wanted an election and more the fact that they knew the opposition did not. And that's where you're getting at when you talk about backing them into a corner. Erin O'Toole, relative unknown still, and the Conservatives don't have their platform ready. The NDP have no money and run the risk of winning fewer seats. And the NDP had already publicly said as well, Robin, that they didn't think it was responsible to have an election during a pandemic. The opposition knew that Canadians would likely blame them if the government fell, even though it was the Liberals who triggered a confidence vote here. And in that case, it was something they were very wary of.
Even so, this puts the country into perpetual election threat mode. Let's remind Canadians that exactly a year ago, they voted in a minority government.
I remember where I was a year ago very well. The question here is whether the Liberals are going to keep using this strategy when they are exposed to scrutiny or to questions that they don't like. Will the government try to bully the opposition like this by threatening an election instead of opening up their books and being transparent? These confidence votes have come in a very short period of time, and it's a strategy that could become unwelcome for the Liberals if they keep going down this path.
As always, good talking to you, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa.